This is episode 29 of the Progression Health podcast, the last episode in a mental health and mindfulness series. And I'm here with therapist Benjamin Russack. Benjamin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Benjamin Russack. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I specialize in all sorts of things, mostly addiction, but I also work with young men of middle age with middle age issues. I work with teens, couples, and families, and all sorts of stuff.
So lots of experience in lots of different areas. And what is kind of like your main area that you focus on, like that you enjoy working in most in terms of psychology and your therapy work?
Say again?
What's the area that you like to focus on most, that you enjoy working in most?
I like, when it comes up, I like doing dream analysis and Jungian archetypal therapy. That's sort of, I always get the opportunity to do that. But because it takes a while to get there with a patient, you can't just start out with that stuff. But I like looking at, symbols and lots of abstract concepts and stuff, but that's not always useful for folks. Usually they have some basic goals they need to meet, hey, my job's not working out, my relationship's not working out, et cetera. So.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot about like CBT, for example, and like those kind of, let's just say like, we'll call them evidence-based practices, but I've heard it like the Jungian style as well. So like, what's the difference? Why is like one more popular than the other? What's your kind of expert opinion on like Jungian versus like CBT style of therapy?
Well, the thing about all therapy is about how do you enact change, and both of those modalities do that. The difference is that CBT is a highly reductive form of thought, of changing your thought patterns and your behaviors. Do this, if not this, then X. And Jungian archetypal therapy, I think, encompasses that. So, if you are, let's say, if you're having a difficult relationship with, your spouse, and you have a dream that is really big and full of rich symbology, and you analyze that dream, you come to a deeper place within yourself about your connection with your spouse and about your relationship to certain situations that might have previously made you uncomfortable. There can be a really transformative experience within that. But CBT is sort of more surgical, whereas archetypal therapy is more. I think it goes deeper, and it's not always as predictable. And I think it's richer, and I think it ends up they both end up doing the same thing. But I think archetypal therapy sometimes will get at things that CBT would have missed because CBT is so specific. Like, what is the exact thought you're having about that? Oh, I'm not good enough. Okay, well, let's talk about your false core belief about how you don't feel like you're good enough. Whereas with archetypal therapy, all that stuff is kind of in there. You don't even have to bring up the fact that the person doesn't feel like they're good enough. It'll just show up in the dreams and the stories of their childhoods and of their unconscious, and it'll just, I don't know how to explain it. It'll happen. It's kind of like the difference between if you went on it's like reading about a vacation in a magazine as opposed to actually going on it. Like it's so much more controlled when you're reading about it or reading about a foreign place. But if you actually go there, it's unpredictable. You might get malaria. You don't know what's going to happen to you. But ultimately, it's a deeper, richer, more human experience. And I think that's what Jungian archetypal therapy offers.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I was thinking it's like with CBT, it changes your relationship to the problem. Whereas with the Jungian explanation you gave, it sounds like you change as a person, and then that changes your relationship with the problem. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of times CBT gets pretty narrow on like, well, let's look at the little issue, whereas archetypal therapy is about, as you say, transformation.
Yeah. So let's say somebody's listening. How would they know if they should go to, like, let's say, a CBT style therapist or a Jungian style therapist? How would they know one's better than the other?
It's hard. That's a really hard. The thing is that that's a very CBT type question that you just asked.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bad question. I don't mean to criticize you, but because I've worked with the most, as I would traditionally.
The Progression Health podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy service which will help you to more effectively manage your mental health. Mental health is very important, and it's something that all of us are realizing now, especially after the pandemic. During the pandemic, for me especially, it was very challenging, and I reached out to BetterHelp. I tried out a few of their licensed therapists and settled on one for the majority of the pandemic, and I found the help that I received invaluable. And the great thing also is that you can speak to your therapist outside of sessions. If it's not working out, you can switch. It's very affordable. It's really easy to use also. And if someone hasn't tried therapy before, but you're kind of, you're curious, I would highly recommend BetterHelp. So what we've done is we've got a sign up link I'll attach in the show notes. And basically you can get a discount to get started and start improving your mental health today. So BetterHelp for better mental health. The Progression Health podcast has teamed up with TRX. So TRX is a bodyweight training piece of equipment that you can hook up anywhere, anytime. And I highly recommend it. I use it in every session with my clients. I use it to warm up and also for stretching. But if you are traveling, which is where I recommend everyone use it, it's hard to get to a gym. It's hard to find the time, but you could literally work out from your hotel room with the TRX and the door attachment that it has, where it doesn't damage the door, but it gives you an effective workout. I also like to add in other things like glute bands and resistance bands. But once you have the TRX, then you can figure all that out. So get yourself 50% off on the TRX home workout equipment with the code Progression Health TRX and boost your workout effectiveness and consistency.
I would say, wow, somebody who is a strict, intellectual who focuses on logic and rationality and measure what you can measure should definitely see a CBT therapist, which is not true, because I've worked with those people, and at first they were very suspect of me and my little shtick, and then all of a sudden, Jungian archetypal therapy opened up a lot of new doors for them because they'd never really gone there, as opposed to somebody who's maybe highly steeped in dreams and is completely into mysticism, needs something a little bit more concrete and reductive like CBT to keep them in line. You just never know. It's a real crapshoot. You've got to really go out there and read about the different modalities and maybe see 2 or 3 different therapists to find out which one is best, or just interview a few therapists to find out which one you think is best for you, which one speaks to you. It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It sounds like you should probably try different therapists and their approaches. Mm-hmm. And then therapists should probably also have a few different approaches like the CBT and Jungian.
I do. I do family systems as well. I do CBT occasionally. I do narrative therapy, which is a lot like Jungian therapy. I do motivational interviewing, very hardcore solution focused therapy, like let's figure this out. It really depends on what I think the needs of the patient are. If someone's life is on fire, Jungian archetypal therapy is not what they need. They need something more concrete. So to answer your previous question, I would say that if you have a lot of issues, like you're drinking too much, or you're about to get divorced, or you have an anger issue, if you're in a really extreme place, I wouldn't necessarily say that CBT is the way to go, but Jungian archetypal therapy might not be great to address real hardcore short-term problems.
Yeah, because the internal change takes longer, I think.
Yeah, so, and by the time the person changes internally, they may have, murdered their neighbor, burnt down a few neighborhoods, and got hooked on heroin. I mean, it's too slow.
Well, hopefully not. Yeah, but that's always possible. You mentioned the family system, so I heard of a type of therapy. It's like, is it internal family systems or IFS? Is that something you've heard of?
Well, there's 2. So internal family systems is more about how your inner processes relate. Like if you can have different, I don't know it too well, but it's basically if different parts of your unconscious or your mind are represented by different people, I suppose. And it's like you're getting them to relate and you're getting those different parts of you to talk and to connect, which is, to me, sounds a lot like Jungian archetypal therapy. A lot of these new therapies like attachment theory and stuff there's something called self-psychology, are all cherry-picked Jung, every single one of them. They just take concepts from Jungian therapy, or maybe they both evolve separately, but it sure seems like they have, and they go, oh, look, these things all make sense. Family systems is nothing like that. Family systems is you look at your actual literal family, and the idea is with a family system, let's say if somebody has an addiction issue, you look at the whole family as having the addiction issue. How are the dynamics in the family contributing to the manifestation of an addiction in one person? And it's not like you're blaming the whole family, but a lot of times, for instance, a good example would be a child who is, let's say, cutting herself and sneaking out at night and drinking with her friends, is expressing the pain and anger she feels about her parents who are fighting like cats and dogs every night, and she can't even be in the house because it's driving her nuts. And so she also expresses her pain by cutting herself. And so that's very much, oftentimes with teenagers especially, family systems can be a really strong approach. And you also can look at intergenerational family stuff. So you'll do these things called genograms where you kind of, if I may, like you'll do circles. I don't know if you can see it. Circles are women and squares are men. So like these two would be sisters. And let's say this is her father, and let's say they have different fathers. And let's say, okay, this father was an alcoholic and she was an alcoholic. And you start to map out the whole thing. And there's this whole sort of tree that you do. It's much more elaborate than that. But there's an actual, you actually map out the different generations and you look for patterns, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So Ben just held up a diagram of different shapes, basically explaining your family. And I feel like you could say, oh, I have an issue with alcohol because it's in my family. Would that be kind of like some kind of a very basic connection you could make in that system?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking of how we said different therapists should have like different styles, and you should try them out. And I'm just thinking of my own experience with therapy, where I've been to 3 therapists, and the first one was good, the second one was better. So as I kind of got older, I feel like I knew what I wanted to work on and stuff like that. Is that the common sort of experience that people should expect, where the first time they go to therapy, it's not going to work right away? Like it might take, a couple of sessions or a couple of different therapists before they see change in themselves. Like, I guess, yeah.
Well, change is very hard to measure sometimes, because if somebody comes in and they're using drugs and they stop using drugs and suddenly their life gets better, like, wow, the therapy is working. No, not necessarily. You're just not taking drugs. But then again, one could say that you needed to go to therapy to do something better for yourself so that you could allow for transformation. Transformation is also tricky because if you think about a tree that needs watering, if a plant's not getting the water and the sunlight that it needs and the fresh air and the earth it needs, it's going to wither. But a therapist can give you very basic things like, hey, stop using drugs, stop working 90 hours a week. Maybe you should go on vacation. Maybe you should do something like start drinking, keeping yourself hydrated and exercising. And suddenly the tree will grow into its natural form. So is that really the therapist? So that's more like I think a better way of saying it is when do you notice that the therapeutic process is enacting change, not necessarily the therapist. So, and as far as deeper long-term change, it's the thing about it is that's really the trickiest part of it, because what you're really talking about is an increase in consciousness, and nobody really knows what consciousness is in the first place. But that, like, say, the Ross from 2 years ago would have if you could speak to yourself of 5 years ago, you'd have a lot to say to that person about life and growing and stuff. And you can't measure, but your consciousness has increased. So therapy is really about growth of consciousness, and how that happens is it's very hard to say. It seems to be that you've got to find out what your work is with a capital W. Like some people have their work is working on their self-esteem. Other people, it's reducing their anxiety. It's forgive, or maybe they're angry at their mother or their father, or maybe they're highly impulsive people. You got to find out what your work is and sort of carry your work with you wherever you go. And like, oh, this is my work, and I'm in this situation now. And I remember this conversation I had in therapy where I get really nervous around, when I meet men my age, okay, I should step into the moment here instead of running like hell, and is that the therapy doing it, or is it the person using the things that they learned in therapy to help themselves grow in their everyday life, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like when you work with a therapist, you hire somebody sort of like in your corner to kind of give you
Yeah,
rational sort of feedback.
They're like a referee sort of, and a mentor, and a this and a that. But the process is really up to the patient.
Yeah, they can't be forced to. A therapist would never force someone to do anything.
Well, they can't. I mean, sometimes I wish I could.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you spoke a little bit about addiction and that you've done work in addiction. Could you just explain what is addiction?
Addiction is any substance or process. So a process would be like sex or gambling or spending money that you are engaged in that is causing damage to your life, and you're doing it anyway, and you can't stop. That's what addiction is. So you can be addicted to anything. So if you're playing video games, let's say there's somebody's playing video games for 4 hours a day, and his girlfriend says, "You're addicted to video games. You're playing 4 hours a day." Well, it's not really hurting his life. If let's say he's making plenty of money, everything's working in his life. The only thing that's kind of not going so great is his girlfriend's kind of annoyed at that. Then is that really an addiction? Not in my opinion. But if he's playing video games 4 hours a day and he's missing work, and his children are running amok because he's not parenting, or he's not taking care of himself, he's not exercising, and his body is going to crap, and he knows that, and he keeps playing video games anyway, then he's got himself an addiction.
So could we be addicted to like anything, for example?
And you can fill in those blanks. That you can be addicted to vacuuming your hall carpet. I mean, whatever it is, it's just how often do you see these things happen? I'm getting more and more patients who are addicted to marijuana. And not because marijuana is necessarily good or bad, but because they're smoking marijuana and they're noticing that smoking marijuana is harming their lives and they can't stop. So they come see me, right? And video games too. Porn is a big addiction. See a lot of that.
So it makes me think about the consciousness. The more conscious you become, the more you could say, "Oh, that habit is actually negatively affecting my life. That's an addiction."
Yeah, and so the more awake you become, you become awake to little patterns and little addictions here and there. I recently quit watching online videos. I was watching these horrible TikTok videos, and it was really destroying my sleep, and I didn't know it. And was I addicted to TikTok? I guess I kind of was, because it was doing damage to my life. I didn't know it was doing damage to my life. And I stopped. And so was it an addiction because I could stop? Maybe it wasn't, I don't know. I just didn't know it was a bad habit. I didn't know that it was hurting me. Yeah.
So that's stopping. So is addiction like curable, or is it just, we just try and manage it over the life course?
You manage it. Addiction isn't usually cured. It's outgrown, which is very different, because it's like a little, if you stub your toe, I use this analogy a lot, and you're 5 years old, it's a big deal. But when you stub your toe as an adult, it's whatever. It still hurts. And addiction is kind of like that. As you grow as a person, as you experience an expansion of your own personality, your ability to manage, let's say, a craving for heroin is, you just have more resources. You might have a bigger community. You've got a bigger space in your heart and your mind to be able to deal with all that stuff.
Yeah, that's actually my own experience with alcohol, where I had the case for drinking versus being, I just call it sober. It just kind of like the community, the resources I had to be sober. Not that I had an addiction, but I just didn't like the relationship I was having. Kind of like the TikTok example. It was like the resources I had to stop just became stronger, and I outgrew it over time. Is there any kind of recipe or formula to build that sort of to outgrow an addiction that you know of? So if somebody has an addiction or some negative habit that's affecting their quality of life, is there any formula or sort of guidelines you could give for them to outgrow the negative habit?
Um, well, it depends how severe it is. I mean, if someone's a junkie wandering the tenderloin, I don't think I could, I couldn't do that. Um, well, you start by looking at how many hours of sleep that you get a night.
Yeah.
You should be getting at least 7.5 hours of sleep per night, every night. Um, are you in good physical health? How are your relationships in your life? Start looking at your life the way you would look at your own life kind of objectively, if you can. And that's what a therapist can help you do. And see if you're satisfied. See if you like the scores that you get. And if you don't, what are you going to do about it? It's difficult for people to look at their lives objectively. It really is hard to do that. I challenge anyone to do it. Most people are wrapped up in either with fantasies of what they think they have or what they think they're being deprived of. They have a lot of resentments and entitlements, and they're just wrapped up in all these fantasies that have nothing to do with actually what's happening in their life. Like, they're always looking to the future or looking to the past about one thing or another, and they're not actually addressing what's actually happening to them. So yeah.
Yeah. So then, does social media have anything to do with that? Like, as in, just for people's general mental health?
Well, yeah. I mean, social media attacks the ego and says we're doing better than you, and if you don't have these things, you're not a decent human being, and you're going to suffer, and that you are suffering, because you're not eating this really cool, you're not drinking this mojito in this really cool patio out on this serene, cove in Mexico, with you know what I'm saying. It's like it's a big ego war out there, basically, and everyone's comparing everything to each other, and it's just people aren't actually trying to get information. They're trying to it's like they're trying to prove something to everybody else, and it's horrible. And the thing about social media also is that it's done in the name of connection, but the more connection there is in social media, the less connection there is in reality. It's extraordinary how much connection is missing from our culture. I mean, I can't measure any of this, but my sense is that there's a what's the word, a negative correlation or something or other between the rise of connection, electronic connection, and the fall of soul connection. I would say they're directly negatively correlated.
Like a negative feedback loop. It's kind of like the more people connect on social media, the less in person.
The less they connect in person. I mean, when's the last time you talked to your neighbors? If we didn't have social media, if we didn't have, this is a little extreme, if we didn't have telephones and stuff, we would have to connect with our neighbors. How else would we know anything? How else would you survive? Your neighbors would be your people. Those would be literally the only people you'd have, connection with, unless you ventured outside of your neighborhood. So technology is really, really useful, but it's incredibly divisive and isolating. Incredibly so.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. So the way that people are like sort of, I guess, kind of showing off on social media, like where does that come from? And if somebody noticed like they themselves were kind of using social media to show off, what would you recommend?
Turn it off.
There we go. Just, yeah, go on.
Turn it off. I mean, I unfollow a lot of people on Facebook that I find just like, look at me and my amazing life. It's like, look how early I got up in the morning to work out. Fuck you. I don't care that you're deadlifting at 5 a.m. That's you were mentally ill for doing that. Or look at me and my little dog in the park, and isn't she amazing? And look at how amazing my life is. It's like, no, your little dog looks annoying. I don't want, nothing like, no, So when I see people on Facebook kind of, what they call it, humble bragging, whatever it is,
yeah,
I see that as a deficit when somebody goes on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, and to show off how amazing everything is. I look at it as like, this person has something to prove, and I kind of get a little nauseous when I see it.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm jealous. Who knows? Maybe I'm just like, fuck that person. I want those things. I'm unfollowing you. It's possible, but I don't know.
So then what value do you think there is in social media if people are using it incorrectly? Like, how would you interact
there's
with it in a healthy
incredible
way?
value in it because, I mean, survival, you can get information. You can like, okay, there's a hurricane coming, you know, I mean, I have this one app called Citizen app that talks about, you know, all the stuff happening in the city. It's incredibly useful, right? If there's a shooting down the street, I'm not going that direction, right? That's good. I think social media is really good for basic survival. It's really good for it affords us an enormous amount of opportunity actually to connect and to learn good things and meet new people and do all sorts of amazing stuff. It's just that we often do not. I think we just use it to feed our own neurotic tendencies. I don't think we use it correctly. So all the things that social media is meant to do, all the little missions that all these little apps and things purport to do are there, but we just don't do them. It's kind of like oxycodone was created to reduce pain, and patient, you know, doctors. There's all these doctor testimonials early on. Of course, Big Pharma promoted this, saying, you know, this is oxycodone is great. It's not addictive. It just takes away all the pain. And it does. All those drugs do what they're supposed to do, and are really, really beneficial if used correctly. However, we don't do that because we're sick in the head.
Yeah. It makes me think that like a few drinks is good, and like a lot of drink is like, you know, you get that hangover, you do silly things when you have a little bit too much. So if we could only figure out like the correct way to use these powerful tools, like, you know, medication and social media, we would be just so much better off. So just with the social connection in person, then I think you said we kind of lack that a little bit. Could you just talk a little bit about that, like why it's social connection in person is so important, even though social media is so powerful, like right now?
Just so your connection is, why is social connection important in person?
Yeah.
That's kind of like asking, you know, why is, you know, working out in the fresh air with the human beings doing a sport better than, you know, sitting at home on a yoga mat lifting weights on YouTube. You know, I mean, it's like, it's totally different. I mean, we have, you know, therapists always like to say hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. You know, they love to say that because it makes them sound official and scientific and smart, but it's true. Yeah. We are evolved to be social animals. We are social nomadic creatures. Why did I say nomadic? Well, nomadic and agricultural, whatever, but we are meant to be with other humans. And I can't prove this, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of parts, like here's the thing. So your physical therapists, like when someone gets an injury, let's say their right leg is injured and their left leg gets overworked, right? And the physical therapist has to get the person, once they're all better, to get that other leg going again, right? It's stiff, it's atrophied. There's been no blood flow because the person hasn't been using it, and their body's all messed up because they've been out of whack because they've had the compensating for this injury, right? So I think that the brain is very much like that we tend to atrophy. We don't use all parts of our mind. And I think that when we're social, we use parts of our brain that we wouldn't normally use, that we don't normally use when we're isolated in our apartments on the freaking computer. And I think that when you are with people, and I cannot prove any of this, I believe that we are more mentally, emotionally, and spiritually active and alive, and our whole being is functioning and it's healthy because everything, it's like another analogy would be when you work out, you've got to change up your workout, right? Because if you get used to it, like I do jujitsu, and I started doing some cross training, and I lost 5 pounds immediately because my body wasn't used to it. Right. It's the same thing. You've got to change it up. Social media is it's the same. It's also social media and stuff is also about dopamine. You get a dopamine hit from clicking things and watching stuff, and you get dopamine hits, you get adrenaline hits, you get endorphins, and you get all these things, and you're not really out there using your being. You're just delivering drugs to your system. How the fuck could that be healthy for you? This is impossible. So nowadays, I actually, I'll force myself to go outside and meet people and do the things. because it's just, I can get on my stupid phone. I just subscribed to the New York Times, which is a terrible mistake because they've got this game on there called the spelling bee. And it's like, they give you like 7 letters and like, okay, there's 146 words, figure them all out. And I'm there on my phone, like, I'm going to figure out all these words. And I'm not out there in the world because I got my face in my phone doing stupid stuff. How could that possibly be healthy?
Yeah, it's like, it's a very good imitation to real life, social media and being on the phone when we're not really kind of like in the arena, living life.
No, we're not. We're not. And we're using the same pathways in our brain over and over and over again. That's, ugh. It's gross.
Kind of regression almost. If you're stuck inside and you're on the phone.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I recommend that people, if you want a really awesome commentary on this, watch the series Station 11, which is I think it's on HBO, which is about a post-apocalyptic world in which it's basically a story about the first generation of children after the fall of technology.
I
recommend it.
Could go, yeah, interesting. I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like a physical therapist and pain, and on your own podcast, you had an episode on pain. And I was just thinking about how does pain and our mental health, how do they interact? So, for example, I know that when people are underslept, they're more sensitive to pain. So do you see clients when they're struggling more with their mental health that they have more symptoms of like pain and injury and stuff like that?
Well, yes, because they have reduced bandwidth and they can't handle, I worked with I've worked with couples when, one of them gets sick or the nanny gets sick and suddenly they're fighting like cats and dogs because they don't have any extra bandwidth. Stress on the system. I mean, if I could sum up a lot of therapy, I would say that just reducing stress on it's like the tree analogy. The healthier the tree is, the more it can withstand the hurricane, the more it can withstand life. So keeping yourself healthy and reducing stress on the system is absolutely key. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of makes me think that with therapy, it helps you to like plug your roots further into the ground, or the therapist can kind of be like, the new trees that are planted and they might have a post beside them that props them up a bit,
Yeah.
Maybe not that literal, but like kind of like basically support for the bandwidth, as you say.
Yeah. Also, I want to go back a little bit and point out the irony that here we are making a podcast, which is a function of social media, and which makes us hypocrites, which I don't care about. But keep going.
Yeah, it's like one rule for everybody else and another rule for us.
Yeah, but fuck them. So anyway, keep going.
Yeah. And then also you mentioned sleep a little bit. So then just like how common is it that people who their mental health isn't as well, the bandwidth isn't as high as they'd like it to be? How often is it that they're also undersleeping?
Like 80% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah. In my practice, not necessarily, that's not the world, but they're like, I'm getting 6 hours a night. Like it's nothing. Like you out of your brain. 6 hours, I want to grab them and shake them. No, sleep is more important than food. It goes this is my hierarchy of needs go air, like oxygen. Then next is water. And then next is sleep and then food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what are kind of like some typical like kind of mental health like sort of symptoms where the people are not sleeping enough? What will people notice with their mental health, like kind of signs that it's declining because they're underslept?
Higher anxiety, higher depression, higher appetite. Actually, when you don't sleep enough, you crave junk food. There's actual science behind that. I'm sure you're aware of it. Weight gain, shorter fuse, snappish, reduced ability to perform at work. You're just not as smart when you're not sleeping as much.
You're not as nice of a person, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, you're just not as efficient as a person.
Yeah.
They've done multiple studies, on dozens of studies on this stuff, where your capacity to remember stuff and do things with accuracy drops by sometimes like 1,000% if you don't sleep enough, like 1,000%, you know? So yeah, sleep, folks. Make it. I make sleep. Sleep is one of my number one priorities. Um. Anyway.
Yeah, you're such a demanding job that you need to perform well. So
Yeah, I can't afford to go to work tired. You know.
Yeah.
I've got to be. I've got to be in tip-top shape mentally.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, I've heard that people who are depressed sometimes they sleep more. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, that happens too. That's some people will turn off. They'll just sleep for like 18 hours. That's a coping mechanism. That's not healthy either.
Yeah,
for sure.
So kind of moderation, somewhere in the middle.
So 8 to 9 hours, 7 to 8 hours, but more than that is not so good. I mean, just like if you're sleeping for 12 hours, that means you're not outside. It means you're not exercising. That means you're not eating regular meals. It means you're not socializing. If you're in your bed unconscious, most of the time, you're not living your life.
Yeah, your bandwidth is going to be very limited. You're not really kind of, if you were to use like a light bulb, it wouldn't be fully switched on if you're kind of sleeping that much. Whereas if you're outside and engaging with people and fully living life, it'd be so much more going on. So just going back to like the Jungian style of therapy then. So meaning, how important is like meaning in our lives? And is there any kind of like common sources that you find help people who are struggling with their mental health to build a sense of meaning?
Well, it's important to have goals because it kind of keeps you moving, keeps you going. But meaning is deeper than that. It's like, because the thing is that it's not clear that meaning even exists. That what if this is all just a bunch of randomness? Carl Jung himself wasn't even sure if there was meaning. He writes about it in his memoir. So you've got to kind of create a narrative, like meaning for me is working on, having meaningful relationships in my life. I like to write. So that's meaningful to me. I like to create things. I like to help people. I like to see people grow and improve. I like to watch, I've got this school next to my office where I watch the kids run around and scream and yell. And that's meaningful because it's like, there's just so much energy and I think about those kids being the future. Those kids are going to run the world someday. And that's really meaningful to think about what, to me, like this temporal arc of like these little kids and where they're going to be. And I was those kids once, and here I am now doing this stuff. And so I think about, yeah, man, for me, there's meaning everywhere. And that's the richness of life, that's the thing that fills you up. But if you chase meaning and, if you're like trying to sleep with as many people as possible or take all the drugs or become as famous as possible, those types of narratives, as far as meaning is concerned, I find they don't really fill people up. They usually have people feeling empty,
So meaning for like sort of personal gain is almost like a road to unhappiness.
It can be, not always. I mean, I know people that make a lot of money and it's meaningful because they get to take care of their families. They get to help other people with the money. They are also, some of them are really afraid of starving because that's their kind of the neurotic tendency is like, oh my God, I got to be as rich as possible or nothing will work. So there's that aspect, but that doesn't mean that has meaning. Like they're not fulfilled by it. It's sort of like it almost quells a neurosis. It's like they're, instead of feeling absolutely out of their minds with fear, they're like a little less out of their minds with fear because they've got $10 million or whatever it is, right? But that's not necessarily meaningful. And it's not, what I'm really saying is that just because someone chases wealth and chases women or chases drugs does not mean that they will be empty, vacuous people. It just means that it's probably not going to fill them up the way they expected or what they wanted. It's probably not going to give them what they're looking for.
Yeah, they might be operating kind of under like false pretenses and
they'll just be like, why don't I feel good about this? I mean, I've got a friend right now who's building quite the empire, and he thinks it's going to make him happy, and maybe it will, but I doubt it. But it might. Didn't mind.
Yeah. So then how would you kind of cultivate a sense of meaning? I know you've given examples of your own meaning. What are some suggestions?
I mean, you got to wait until somebody in your therapy room starts talking about something that seems meaningful to them, and you just say something simple like, "Hey, say more about that." It's like you're out in the gardening and you see a volunteer come up. The term volunteer, like when something you didn't plant just pops up and it's useful, like a tomato plant or something like that. So something pops up, like some thought or some idea pops up, and it just seems really meaningful and like out of nowhere. Like then you go and you cultivate that, you water it, you give it some like, hey, let's check this out. That's really useful. Let's grow this thing that just sprouted in your head.
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm like thinking when life gives you mental lemons. So like when you get some sort of like source inspiration or some sort of like jolt of energy, you make lemonade, you make something out of that sort of whatever that kind of whatever's giving you life.
Yeah, but it's not always sour. Sometimes it comes up as peaches or strawberries, and you make strawberry pie, which is, you ever had strawberry pie?
No, but now I want some, so I might have to have some.
You have some strawberry pie with whipped cream on it.
Oh yes, the whipped cream.
Somebody get me a strawberry pie.
In Ireland, it's apple tart, so I haven't.
Apple tarts.
Yeah.
Well, one of my things, I've got a binge eating disorder, so my food is my insanity. So you got me. We got started. I shouldn't have brought up the whole farm analogy. Now I'm hungry.
Your head's off to the races. You're thinking of food. Yeah. But speaking of just going back to the addictions again and going on food, like food's essential for life. So people might say like, oh no, I couldn't be addicted to food, but how would someone know they're addicted to food, and how is that possible if it's already required for life?
Well, it's one of the toughest addictions to kick because you got to eat.
Yeah.
Well, you're addicted to food if you can't stop eating and you're gaining weight, and you're binging. If it's effing up your life, it's effing up your health. You got heart issues, you got other types of issues because you can't stop eating. Then you got yourself an addiction. It's no freaking fun. There's other eating disorders, anorexia, where people restrict, or bulimia, where they they vomit up their food, and those are different. But
yeah, if you had to say, what percentage of the population do you think has an addiction of some kind? I feel like the more I talk about it, the more I think the majority of people have something.
I would absolutely say the majority of the population. I wouldn't know what majority, because that's an impossible thing for me to measure. It's a very precise question. I would say that far more people are, for instance, alcoholics. I think that would be a better place to start. Is like, what percentage of the population are actually alcoholics? It wouldn't surprise me if the number of people, if the percentage was like 40% or 30%, that there was some level of alcoholism that it was that widespread. Not necessarily severe, like passing out in the gutter, drunk alcoholic, but like I think that it's extraordinarily high.
Yeah, I think when you look at the guidelines for alcohol intake, it's like 1 drink for a woman a week and 2 for a man, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but yeah. And then you see how we would typically drink in one sitting. We blow that weekly amount out in one night. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, notice how often people talk about, well, I drank and I don't remember what happened. You drank to the point of blacking out. That's a common story. That should not be a common story.
No. Consciousness is like a gift, to be aware and to be able to think, and to lose that is frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember watching a game recently, and a guy I got talking to at the bar was like, "Oh yeah, I drove home drunk. I shouldn't do that."
Yeah, you think?
That was the second time I did that. Oh, that was terrible. I shouldn't do it. And I'm just like, what's going on here? You're telling me you shouldn't do it, but you did it twice. It's like such a disconnect. But that's just kind of, unfortunately, the situation we're in with the amount of addiction there is. So then another podcast you were talking about a life coach. And that's something that I've heard of a lot recently. And like people can become qualified as life coaches. So like, what's the difference between a life coach and a therapist? And is there a time to see a life coach over a therapist, or do you see them together? Could you explain a bit about that?
Fortunately, I have a whole podcast episode on my podcast. Look, just tell me what to do, available on iTunes, dedicated to this exact question. However, I will answer it. Honestly, man, the main difference is that it's, oh man, it's just the sheer amount of training. So a life coach, therapists have very specific training. They're trained to recognize certain symptoms, and they can diagnose, and they have all this they know all these safety protocols, when to send someone to the hospital, when to call the police, blah blah blah. There's all these boundaries and safety and ethical issues that your trained therapist knows about that a life coach may not necessarily know about. Their training generally is only about a year. But a life coach, I'm speaking generalities. A life coach is just, it's an unregulated field. So anybody can call themselves a life coach. Anybody can get a piece of paper and put life coach on it and hand it out and say, I'm a life coach. There are private organizations that will give you a title life coach, but it's not like I'm like the government of the state of California I'm licensed by the state of California. And that doesn't make it necessarily better or worse. It's just, I don't know how to answer that question. It's a kind of a complicated question, but basically, a good life coach is as good as any therapist, and a good therapist is as good as any life coach. It's all just words, because if you put two people in a room, did we talk about this? If you put two people in a room, the one who's more healed will heal the other one.
Oh, right.
Right. And if the life coach is in a really strong position and a really good person and really knows their client really, really well, who's to say that life coach couldn't heal that person as well as a therapist? Plenty of therapists, they just go and they check boxes. They just spend a bunch of years in school, spend a bunch of money, and think that, oh, I'm a therapist now, so therefore I know something, and they're worthless. Whereas a life coach might be, my God, I can't afford to go to school for all those years. I really have a lot to offer the world, and they study like hell. And they take tons of classes on their own and read tons of books about healing on their own and learn all the ethical things on their own. They're not necessarily as technically qualified as a therapist, but they may be amazing. It's hard to tell. Different life coaches also specialize in different areas. The traditional life coach is very goal oriented. Like if you like a career life coach, but can be very concrete and like do this, do that, do this, do that, do that, do that, do that. But that's not always what a life coach is. It's a hard question to answer, man, because I've encountered so many incompetent therapists and so many life coaches I thought were really awesome. And I've also encountered a lot of life coaches who were pompous, pretentious fools and were practicing some really unethical stuff because they didn't have any consequences because they weren't therapists, right? Yeah. A life coach, what if somebody with an addiction went to a life coach? The life coach could in a way, kill that person because they can say anything, right? They're not trained around some really rigorous, they're not as rigorously trained in some of those areas. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But then again, what if someone with an addiction went to a life coach who was in the program in Alcoholics Anonymous and knew addiction backwards and forwards? You could easily send someone with addiction to a therapist who says, yeah, I'm trained in addiction because they had 3 classes in it in school and they don't know anything. It's a really tough question to answer.
Yeah, I think you're kind of speaking to the power of like connection. So if you get the right connection, it can change your life. A good therapist, a good life coach. The wrong one, yeah.
Anything, any human being. I mean, you could talk to some, homeless guy on the corner and he could change your life tomorrow. You don't know. It's just that when someone becomes a therapist or a life coach, chances are a little bit better that they're in a position to help you than the guy in the corner,
Yeah. Yeah, they're likely more healed, unfortunately.
It's really difficult to find people who can help you in this world. And that's really the question. How do I find somebody who can help me?
Yeah. So you're making me think of gurus and how gurus have risen in popularity in just different areas. Like one of my clients just said, I have a guru and teach me exercise and stuff. And then when I heard about this guru, I was kind of like, I don't know about the relationship this guru has with their, exercise habits. She sounded very like unwavering and uncompromising to the client. So, what does that say, that there's a rise? Do you think there's a rise in gurus in different fields in the world? And what do you think that says?
Oh, I mean, I think people are looking for family and connection, and I think gurus give that they kind of mainline that,
sort of monetize it.
Yeah, they monetize it. I mean, a guru can be a great thing, and a guru can be a terrible thing. One of the real traps of a guru is they make people feel like they're experiencing love by identifying with, you come in and you identify with everybody else in the group, and they instantly love you because you're following all their ideas. But the problem is if you suddenly start to individuate a little bit and have separate ideas, a lot of times you'll get kicked out of the group, or you'll be chastised or ostracized by the group, and that can be really painful. So there's a lot of things that come along with gurus that are pretty risky. I think the rise, if there's indeed a rise of gurudom right now, I think it's a result of a lack of sense of connection and family and belonging and home, and fragmentation in the world, just increased fragmentation in the world.
Yeah, that sounds pretty sad, that there's a lack of like family and connection. Do you think that trend is real?
Without question. Yeah, that goes back to our earlier conversation around technology and social media.
Okay, and then just to kind of circle back a little bit again, so social media, just to be clear, it's kind of like an inadequate way to connect. There's no replacing the real in-person connection.
Yeah, it replaces everything. Terrible.
Yeah. So then, what are some ways that people can get back that connection that they're kind of losing nowadays? Like, is there any sort of easy way to do that?
No.
To start.
No. Walk outside your front door and wave to your freaking neighbor. How about that? Call your mom. Go hang out with your siblings. Go call 3 friends a day and ask them how they are. Start going to church on Sundays. I'm not a huge advocate for religion, but whatever. Join a pickup soccer team. Go to that barbecue that you were invited to. Do social things. Do basic unsexy things that have people in them. It's really simple.
It really is, but that's almost the hard. It's so bizarre. It's like that's the hard thing to do nowadays. It feels like.
Yeah, because we're so busy with all the stupid projects that we've given ourselves technologically, wrapped up with meeting deadlines and doing the things and all this stuff. And it's like all this social media shit and all this tech and all these modern contraptions that we think are so awesome. We're caught up in the creation of those things. To what end? It's like we're building bridges to nowhere. It's amazing.
We're like building bridges away from each other.
Yeah. Like. And like, oh my God, look at this incredible bridge I'm building. We got to create more tools to make this an even better bridge. Look at the color of this bridge. Oh, wow. Look, this one goes all the way out into the Pacific Ocean. This bridge is like 80 miles long. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? You know what it needs? It needs another bridge next to it. And like,
Well, it's crazy you say that, because we have Elon Musk trying to go to Mars. So he's building a bridge to Mars, a metaphorical bridge. And then we have Meta as well. So like we're building bridges away from each other, like literally and figuratively, which it's frightening. So to finish on a happy note, depression. So you have some episodes on depression, and I think depression is pretty like, I guess the question I could ask is, with depression, do you think some people could be depressed and not know it? Or what are your thoughts around it?
For sure. Yeah, because you can be gradually sliding down and down and down and not know it. Yeah, for sure. You got to look for telltale signs, or how active you are, and it's not easy because it can be so subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it likely that we would all experience, so twofold question, depression at some point in our lives and also addiction?
Yeah.
No, you meant to say, you meant to lie to me and tell me
but the thing about depression is that depression can be really monstrous or it can be really subtle. So like there's some forms of depression where you can't get out of bed and you have these what's called a major depressive episode, and you don't eat, whatever, you can't leave the house, and people self-harm, and it's terrible stuff, right? And then there's the more subtle form of depression, which is just sort of, you're sort of sad more days than not, and you have these sort of lingering symptoms of sadness and dysfunction and stuff. So it's there's different types of it. But yeah, pretty much everybody. I mean, who doesn't feel sad sometimes?
Yeah.
Who's ever been involved in something like, who's ever like, how many people do you think have a sugar addiction? How many people can't stop eating chocolate?
Yeah, absolutely. You think about like, grief and stuff like that. It's normal to feel sad sometimes, but not without cause, And I feel like that's where a professional would come in and say, this is like, it is, it isn't, or it is depression, or it isn't, or it's that severe type or that lesser type, and how to manage it. Is that something that you work with commonly with clients?
Yeah, all the time. It's a constant battle against the elements. Yeah, all the time.
To get back to our roots and sort of connect.
Yeah.
In real life. Yeah.
Yeah. Most, Carl Jung said, and we can kind of maybe close out on this one idea. Carl Jung said he was tired of trying to spearhead individual neurosis or individual bad habits that people had or bad ideas. And he was more interested in just the growth of the person. Because as you grow and you become more yourself, more expansively you, and as your consciousness increases, all your bad habits will sort of ameliorate. They'll sort of slough off. They'll flake away. They'll float away into space, And really it's about growth. So if you've got a major issue, most of the time, spearheading that issue is not the solution. It's your own personal growth that will take care of that problem.
To me, that means a rising tide raises all boats.
A what?
A rising tide raises all boats, to sort of just grossly oversimplify your really eloquent quote.
Yeah.
But absolutely. Brilliant. Benjamin, thanks very much for your time. It's been a really interesting episode.
All right.
And I'll attach all your links and everything to the show notes so that people can find you and check out your own podcast.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
Great. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.